Yes, so like maybe on the personal theory and principle that I'm sitting on to believe that like Steve would definitely be right at this point on like the situation is like right now, like the excuse that Nancy have right now told Steve to not go to like the movie. Steve is like the whole thing with like the funeral and everything. Yet like when Steve had the room showed up, he had seen Nancy with like the baseball bat, like seeing like the baseball bat. So like definitely Steve would be totally feeling like as if like the excuse that Nancy told something off with that would be like part two of this for Steve. So like I'm different definitely Steve to like see the talk Nancy and definitely I'm still thinking about the references to that like without like create like Nancy would be meeting up with like Jonathan in like the Mercury Forest and about the they will be searching for like the monster and then they bring them not finding like the monster in like the Mudfoot forest is fine. And they will be finding searching for that monster. They won't be finding like the monster. And instead what will be happening would be like in that whole process of searching like emphasis between Nancy and Jonathan getting a lot closer. So it's like the scenario that happens where Steve would be like secretly stalking Nancy and Jonathan that entire time, and she would be like extremely like in an enraged manner would be like and he would be seeing this and like he would be getting extremely jealous and enraged on seeing this and considering that him to take out all that him to have all that jealousy towards like Jonathan at that point and him to take out all that jealousy and anger by most likely bullying Jonathan the very next day at school. While Jonathan is showing up to school like about to bring that Steve will be most likely bullying Jonathan and definitely about to bring that Nancy most likely witnessing that is also like the scenario that I'm about to bring another impression. So like the other possibility that I'm super thing is for like maybe like it could be after like the combined Mirkwood sort of search of like Nancy and Johnson would be over and basically with like that search currently using no results, but them not being like see any monsters there like I was putting at that point Nancy and Johnson returning back deciding to like return back home to like look search another way and so like replace Jonathan would be on his way back home, like supposedly Steve, like following Jonathan and like showing up in front of Jonathan and basically at that point like Steve totally bullying Jonathan. And considering like at that point like Jonathan being totally I think totally submissive especially because of like him having all that insecurity of like taking all the photos and everything earlier and so like Steve totally bullying Jonathan and maybe Steve attacking Jonathan and considering maybe like the next day when Jonathan would be shot and Steve totally threatening Jonathan and giving Jonathan that warning to like never meet or talk to Nancy again. Like and maybe like that's like the other possible scenario that I was doing. And so like the next day when Jonathan would be showing up to school, like basically Nancy noticing like all these injuries on Jonathan and Johnson like totally to like avoid like the whole issue between like Nancy and Steve, like maybe like Johnson singing along in such an extremely empathetic manner and Johnson trying to like hide that the fact that Steve it was Steve that had attacked Johnson and caused that injury to like Johnson, like maybe Johnson trying to like hide that from Nancy and like maybe like Johnson trying to even keep himself away from Nancy as well. There's also like a problem with that. So solely for like maybe Jonathan feeling acting in such an extremely empathetic manner solely for like the future of like the relationships between like Steve and Nancy. Maybe like Jonathan thinking around the lines and basically cause any trouble or like issues between the relationship. Maybe like Jonathan thinking along such extremely empathetic manner and Jonathan like staying away from Nancy after like Nancy will be like asking Jonathan asking like what happened with Jonathan like what the reason for like injuries and all that like Jonathan at that point only acting in like in a different manner to the previous day and like Jonathan trying to like stay away from Nancy so like I'm supposing eventually Nancy is only figuring out that it was Steve that had basically bullied and attacked Jonathan and that way like eventually like that whole issues between like the relationship between Steve and Nancy happening eventually if like the scenario that I'm looking for maybe like that eventually resulting in like Steve eventually like getting angry with like Nancy and like Steve telling Nancy about like how he had seen that basically that Nancy uh, being so close to like Jonathan and all that like and bring that Nancy at that point like doing that absolute like towards like Steve for like stocks with them and all that and then bring like that whole quarrel between Nancy and Steve happening and Steve then like maybe that quarrel eventually led to like Steve eventually that's bullying Nancy as well. And at that point, I'm about to bring like and I'm going to bring that to like most likely happen maybe while it might be happening at school and maybe like in school premises. So like at that point, maybe like Jonathan seeing this and basically maybe at that point like the submitter is Jonathan like totally showing up and saving and protecting Nancy and like putting Steve in his place and Steve totally being shown at that point. That's like the other possible scenario that I was bring him up in the range. And my secondary impressions were like still for like Steve to like still not give up and still Steve like that absolute desire to like get revenge on like Jonathan and at that point like that desire forming within Steve to like not only get revenge on Steve but also on Nancy from that way on and with that absolute crux of a feeling that kind of bring like Steve from that day on like still keeping up with like stalking of like Jonathan and Nancy while in parallel I'm taking uh, like in the case of like Mike and his friends like I'm talking them would be like constantly would be especially after like the recent Troy fight incident like I'm talking definitely Troy as well continuing starting to like stop Mike and his friends and Eleanor like wherever they will be going like it's also like the scenario that I was saying so like these initially I'm about to bring the case to stalkers like Steve as well as Troy I'm about to bring at some point like meeting up with like the scenario that I'm about to maybe like then initially like the detectives are like working together to to get their revenge on like Mike and friends as well as like Nancy and Jordan, like they maybe them even working together in that those computers also like a possible remote kind of setup scenario that and this is the first thing and method reimbursement. This and definitely thing for like Steve, the character Steve as well as Troy to like basically cross paths at like some point in that specific or second year scenario that I'm going to bring another reimbursement. So yes, sir, that limit of reimbursement right now as for like Hopper calling his like X5 like campus, which I think that the reason would be like Hopper right now would be like only feeling as like even though Brenner and his team had like actually captured Hopper and yet like chose to like leave Hopper alive right now for the time being. Like that would be along the line Hopper would be thinking like he was only left alive by Brenner and his team only for the time being because like Hopper would be definitely determined to like definitely dig deeper into Pranav and his like laboratory and once again like eventually integrate back into Pranav's laboratory like Hopper would definitely be having that definitely dead. So like definitely Amble different like Hopper right now would be totally feeling as if like just that it's like close that basically the more he dig deep into like finding the truth behind that Pranav and his like laboratory like basically like that would be what that dying in wait for Hopper would be along the lines of would be right now feeling of the film I would bring it. So that would be the precise reason for like would most likely precisely like the reason for right now for right now calling to like ex-wife and especially with like the ex-wife even straight away even telling Hopper the truth on that basically she told Hopper to like never call her again. So like the precise reason would be precisely definitely like Sarah's death, like I'm also pregnant definitely Hopper's ex-wife, like Sarah's death and like Hopper's like ex-wife, like she might have gotten divorced from Hopper like around like the same time. It's definitely my good friend. It might have been soon after like Sarah's death, like Hopper's ex-wife might have Hopper's wife might have only gotten divorced from him. It's definitely my boyfriend. It's definitely because like she might have only my boyfriend impression that like, she might have only blamed Hopper for like the death of Sarah. It's definitely my boyfriend. It's already revealed that Hopper, yeah, at a point in his past used to work in electricity and those different it might have been like Hopper's like decision to basically move to like the town of Hawkins, like move away from the city and the town of Hawkins and Hopper might have but maybe that Hopper might have only tried his absolute best to have his black wife as well as his daughter Sarah live with him in like the town of Hawkins. But definitely his wife might have only felt that basically that daughter Sarah would be having that especially with like her having such shown such flavor from like science. Definitely Sarah might have actually had like such IQ. Definitely my boyfriend. So like she would Hopper's wife might have definitely felt that Sarah would have like a bright future if she lives in like the school in like the city and all that is definitely my personal impression. So that way, like maybe like a whole quarrel might have happened between like Hopper and his wife, and maybe like that way like Copper might have ended up staying in, and maybe like Sarah as well maybe might have like wanted to like stay in like so might have preferred to like stay in like the city rather than in like the town of Hawkins. Definitely my brother. So like at that point Copper might have decided to maybe leave to like the town of Hawkins, and like maybe that quarrel might have maybe resulted in like Copper deciding to like leave to the and take charge in like the town of Hawkins. But, like one possibility that I could bring, or like the other possibility is like maybe like Copper might have got the transfer from like the city, and Copper might have genuinely like to like live in like if not like if like in like the city, Copper might have preferred to like live in a place like Hawkins. Definitely able to so like countryside like Hawkins is definitely my good impression. So uh, when Hopper might have like got the transfer, and I'm considering maybe like Hopper might have not done anything to like get that transfer to Hawkins. Yet like I'm considering when Hopper got that transfer, like I'm considering like Hopper might have told just like the wife and Sarah that like they should move to like Hawkins. But like I'm considering like the wife might have been of like the opinion that like Hopper should like totally like try um, something else in to some other job or like something to like basically for Hopper to like still stay in like the city and to prioritize like that of Sarah's like right future and everything. So anyway, like I'm about to bring that quarrel might have happened and Hopper might have finally taken the decision to like head off and basically live by himself in like the town of Hawkins. And eventually I'm about to bring like Sarah at some point might have showed up to like the town of Hawkins to totally meet Hopper, her father Hopper, especially in like the past definitely my preference. And that might have been like the point when like Sarah might have been gotten abducted by Warner and his team. And definitely my first impression were like Sarah might have definitely since like 11th 11th name is like 11 is basically named 11. Definitely I'm still thinking about the impression that like Sarah might have been like the 10th experiment of Warner or like 10th failed like experience from 1 to 10 might have been a failure, and Sarah might have been like one among those numbers from 1 to 10, and Sarah might have died due to like Brenner's experiment, and that might have only resulted in like basically like Brenner might have totally like managed to like still cover his tracks, and maybe like Brenner might have framed Sarah's death into like making it appear as if like Sarah died in like the woods after being attacked by some wild animal or something. Just remember the like for that, then since like he might have been so extremely traumatized, like I'm going to bring like he might have totally not been able to find like the book. Like I'm going to bring like Copper might have actually believe that like the like that of its not Sarah was like uh, uh was due to like that side of like some wild animal in like the woods or something. Definitely might be wrong because like Hopper might have been in such a traumatized state, like Hopper might have not been able to like precisely like find out like anything suspicious in like the couple of Sarah certainly not good and bro. I'm also bring since then like Sarah like Hopper's wife since then might have been blaming Hopper for like basically living in like the town of Hawkins and that being the result of like Sarah that and basically Sarah that seems like that was like the sole reason for like Sarah to like show up to like the town of Hawkins who's doing to learn certainly like Sarah but like since that they like Hopper's wife might have like blamed Hopper and might have, without much delay at all, might have gotten divorced from Hopper. Is what might have happened is definitely not good, but then still, even to this day, like Sarah, I mean, like Hopper, like its wife might have definitely had that dislike towards Hopper, and that might be the reason for like right now, as like Hopper even told his wife, ex-wife, like her even straight away responding back that basically that she had told Hopper to never told her. It's definitely my good friend. So like I'm wondering, even though Hopper and still thinking about the impression that like Hopper right now even calling and his like ex-wife even after she having told in like the past to Hopper to like never call her would be precisely because of like Hopper right now the only feeling as like he might die soon. It's definitely that Brenner and his team might take his life like Hopper would just strongly feeling getting that feeling, and this would be the precise reason for like him like calling his like ex-wife. He might have wanted to like talk to his like ex-wife before he died. It's certainly one of the famous. So this might be the sort of for like Hopper right now calling his like advice. But like I'm trying like right now itself for like Hopper to like to initially the so like what to initially even though Hopper was talking to his like ex-wife right now through like the phone. As if like he genuinely wanted to talk with his wife, but like I'm considering get like after hearing like the cry of the baby like for quickly ending like the conversation and like hanging up the phone boogie precisely due to like Hopper at that point after hearing like the cry of like the baby because like my cousin impression said like the moment Hopper heard like the cry of like the baby through like the phone like at that point itself like Hopper might have straight away felt that basically his ex-wife has totally moved on from Sarah like from like the loss of Sarah and it was just Hopper alone that even to like the present day was like totally sad and like totally drowning in like that absolute sadness of like losing Sarah that like his ex-wife had already moved on from the loss of Sarah might have been what Hopper at that point itself from hearing like the cry of like the baby of uh, his ex-wife might have felt, and that might be the potential reason for like Hopper right now that could be ending like the conversation and like could be hang up like the phone as soon as he heard like the cry of the baby or the phone. It's definitely my personal impression right now. So like basically my personal impression right now is that basically Hopper might have only felt like I'm hearing like the cry of like the baby that Hopper might have at that point really felt that basically so that just like ex-wife has already probably forgotten about Sarah and moved on from Sarah. So like since she has moved on from even Sarah, like she would have only absolutely fully forgotten about like definitely fully might have forgotten about Hopper that is like Hopper even dies tomorrow, like it wouldn't even remotely affect or like, even man who is like ex-wife might be that realization that Hopper might have had at that point. And that might be the reason for like Hopper quickly ending like, the conversation as hanging up the phone is like my percentage impression right now. So like the new impressions were like Hopper might have only known that basically even to like the person like Hopper might have only known that basically his like ex-wife has gotten remarried to like this guy named Bill. But like the fact that they had a baby might be uh, something that Hopper might have only realized only right now in like the present through like the phone call. Uh, it's definitely my personal and that might have been such a shock to like Hopper is also looking at the it was like Hopper right now, calling his like his wife, would you possess me with that blue intent for like for something like to once again say his like that is like genuinely sorry for like Sarah that that basically to like apologize for like one last time might have been like because like Hopper might have said that he might die soon, so like Hopper might have called his ex-wife with like the intent to like apologize for one last time before to reset right for like that before he dies might have been with like the intent that Hopper uh, might have been like his whole intent for like Hopper right now actually right now is calling his like ex-wife so definitely my very much. Okay, so like definitely my very interesting right now as for like the process force in this like my his friends are right now working with their compass trying to find like the bottom will be that force will be precisely marked with for definitely my very interesting. So like right now definitely the scenario that I'm totally predicting is definitely for like 11 already being the term like definitely 11 won't be able to like bring herself to like to proceed much further. Definitely my goal then. So like Rail zone I'm preparing scenario to be like an extremely scale 11 like straight away running away from running in like the opposite directions like the scenario that I'm preparing. And at that point I'm preparing like at that point I'm preparing maybe Mike running after 11 and Mike straight away telling that Lucas as well as Dustin to like keep proceeding further and like I will go get 11 like that's in such a manner like them splitting up and like Mike chasing after like the running 11 is like while that's when Lucas will be proceeding further with their combat is like one possible scenario that I'm preparing for like the other possible scenario will be as 11 would be running away in like the opposite direction scale like at that point with like Mike as well as Lucas as well as Dustin like all three of them chasing after 11 so like that's like the other possibility that I'm also bring but like I'm leaning more towards like the possibility of like Mike and his friends like at that point splitting up is like Mike alone like chasing after 11 is like the scenario that I'm able to bring so definitely as of right now my very impression right now that is listen like the current situation is also like Jonathan as well as like Nancy precisely also in like Markwood Forest, like practicing their aim and everything like this. Really, I'm considering like precisely like the moment 11 would be running away. like and Mike would be following up for 11. And like at that point, if I'm bring like the scenario would be like right now for things using most likely maybe like Nancy and Jonathan by then would have like explored deep into like the Murford forest, and they might have them actually running into that monstrous creature. It's like the possibility that I'm considering as of right now. And at that point, definitely I'm considering like straight away like I'm considering Johnson like using the gun, but like I'm considering that that monster creature might be fast. So like I'm considering it things like the bullet. That's like one scenario that I'm considering, or like the other scenario that I'm considering is like even bullets not affecting like actually Johnson actually succeeding in like landing the shot at like the monster, but like even bullets not facing like the monster like might have like such extreme superpowers and defenses. It's like the other possible scenario that I'm referring. So the monster at that point like attacking Jonathan. And right then itself like the gun would be like Jonathan would be losing that gun at that point, and like the monster attacking Jonathan at that point. And at that point, I'm also going Nancy totally quickly picking up the gun, and like Nancy possibly firing multiple shots at like successfully at like the monstrous creature. Yet like even that the monstrous creature like either all those shots like still not affecting like the monster creature, or like I'm going to bring even then like I'm going to bring like the monster creature like Nancy missing a bunch of those shots as well, like the perfect scenario that I was doing. So like anyway the scenario that I'm going to bring is like at that point for like Nancy totally being unable to do anything at all, like and Nancy being totally scared, seeing like the monster like at that point about to take Jonathan's life. So like at that very last second, considering like at that point Nancy would be possibly maybe like frozen with fear, and like Jonathan would be about to die by the hands of that monster creature. But like at that point, I'm considering 11 like the first direction, opposite direction in which like 11 would be running away from, would be slightly ending up like the as 11 would be running away, like 11 ending up to in that very exact spot location. And like 11 would be seeing the like monster creature like trying to take the life of like Johnson. So like at that point, like 11 using 11's like 11 like maxing out like using like a serious level of intensity of like it's like 11's like superhuman powers, and like using that superpower of 11 like with like a greater intensity and also 11 like basically maybe like taking the life of like that monster. It's like either like I'm considering being more just about that 11 most likely won't be taking the even with like 11 superpowers like 11 won't be able to like take the life of that monster, but like I'm considering like still with 11 superpower like 11 is still managing to like scare away like that monster creature is like the scenario that I'm considering. That way like the monster creature running away, and like Jonathan as well as Nancy totally shocked at seeing like 11, then having absolutely no idea or clue at all as to like who this kid is and how she has like all these superpowers Mike at that point Jonathan as well as Nancy staring at 11 in with like the biggest like confused face. And right then itself like I'm also feeling like Mike would be chasing after 11 and would be making it to that location. So like once again another shot with like Nancy seeing Nancy totally and Johnson seeing Mike there, and basically like then like the whole discussion and what to happen. And I'm also by then like I'm also bring uh, uh at that point I'm also bring like Mike totally totally being unable to light his way out of it. So like I'm also bring like the whole and I'm also bring like that at that point like for like the whole discussion and exchanging of like all the information that Nancy and Jonathan know, with them exchanging that all of that with like Mike, and basically Mike exchanging all the information he knows about like 11 and everything with like Nancy and Jonathan at that point. It's like the scenario that everything, and while they will be like discussing and exchanging all this information at that point, both the think uh, like Dustin and Lucas will be by then returning back, like the scenario that I was doing. So like I was bringing like as for Dustin and Lucas, I was bringing they would have made it using the compass, like they would have made it all the way to like that gate or like that fence, outer gate and fence of like the energy laboratory. So like they so like them already with like them having two of their members like 11 as well as Mike gone like and on top of that like supposed to bring like Dustin and Lucas at that point would be of the mindset like after they would be like watching their compass, and they would be able to like make their way into like the fence of like the energy level. At that point, like I'm considering they Mike and Lucas totally feeling as I mean like Dustin and Lucas at that point totally feeling as like they have found like the precise location like the like I'm considering maybe from like what's beyond the fence would be like the precise their target location and where like the portal would be. So like at that point I'm considering what might have happened would be like so like after finding that much, like I'm considering like Dustin and Lucas like basically at that point returning back like to like that direction, returning back and they would be like searching for like Mike and 11. So like I'm considering while Mike and 11 would be like discussing and exchanging information with like Nancy and Jonathan. At that point, I'm hearing like the shouting of like Mike by Lucas and Dustin. So like that way like Mike shouting back and that way like Dustin and Lucas joining like that's all the discussion and like them all like collectively becoming a team and exchanging all the information they know. And basically from that point on like them working together in like coordination as well. From that point on, so like also like a positive like a positive. From that point on, like it just not being like the team of like Mike and his friends and 11 alone, but like them even receiving help and like them even offering help as well to like Nancy and Jonathan's team as well. So it's like sequential scenario that I'm going to do and my first impression. And that eventually possibly even leading to like the safely Troy as well as like Steve as well eventually crossing paths with like definitely with two of their targets would be definitely teaming up as like two of the targets would be teaming up like I'm also saying like eventually definitely eventually like Troy as well as like Steve eventually crossing paths as well. So like the scenario that I'm going to putting for right now in my 2020. It's all like definitely my personal impression right now as for like the experiment of trainer that like right now 11 is like remembering about like where like trainer shows like this black and white photo of like a person that trainer wants like possibly wants wanting like 11 to communicate and being like farther than ever before that like 11 would have communicated like definitely as for this experiment, my personal impressions are like the best person in like that black and white photo that Rana had showed 11 numbers bring that might actually possibly even be like Rana's boss. It's definitely my personal impression. So like maybe like the parallel version of him living in like the parallel world whom like Rana will be totally expecting and possibly hoping to be alive. Like maybe Runner might be like in like the real world, maybe like Brenner's boss he might have died. So like maybe like Brenner might want to like communicate to the parallel version of such boss and to like maybe that way figure out like how much like the this, like boss in like the this parallel version of this boss in like the parallel world, how much like the Brenner would only expecting like this very same experiment that he's doing like would be like also be like possibly conducted in like the parallel version of Brenner by the parallel version of Brenner as well as like the parallel version of like Brenner's boss making the parallel version of Brenner doing all that experiment. So like maybe Brenner might have been expecting like the possibility of like the parallel world like the experiment like possibly having advanced further a lot further than how much Brenner has advanced in just like experimenting in like the real world. It's also like a possibility that I'm considering. So like I'm considering right now in the part where like 11 is like the play that is what I'm also practicing right now to be revealed where like the play alone is like able to like even go to like the upside down location like I'm considering like that I'm considering right now to be revealed with like 11 right now totally like attempting to like basically communicate to like the parallel version of like Brenner's like boss in like the parallel world, like 11 from like the real world right now with like the experiment of like Reiner. This like 11 is right now remembering I'm remembering like Reiner might have attempted using his experience to like force 11 to like try to like communicate to like the parallel version of Reiner's parallel version of Fox. It's definitely my working impression. And I'm considering that experiment might have been too much for 11. And I'm considering that experiment might have ended up in a failure. That experiment that like 11 right now, like remembering at that point, like that experiment might have ended up in a failure and that might have caused like a lot of possibly health issues as well for like for 11. Definitely my working impression. So like this would be like, that would be like such an extreme trauma for lying in like 11's mind thinking of that experiment is definitely my first reaction. So that attempt by 11 to communicate with like the parallel version of like the boss of Brenner, like campus Brenner, that might have ended up maybe like ended up not being a full success at all, especially when the like maybe like 11 might have only been able to like just uh, make the communication just for like a few seconds at all, with like the parallel version of foreigners both who might have been alive in like the parallel world. Yet like I'm assuming it might have only been just like a few seconds of communication before like the like it might have like even attempting such an extreme long distance communication through across dimensions like might have into like the parallel world might have caused that extreme health issues for like 11 at that point is like the scenario that I'm considering. So this is my personal impression as to like what might have happened. This definitely my friend. So like definitely my personal impression right now with like the extremely scared and tension filled for 11 like right now already having like the nosebleed as like my kind of friends are like basically getting closer to that runners like the laboratory. So the thing that eventually upon to my personal impression once like I'm to bring like should be precisely 11 that will be saving like definitely according to my personal impression right now pressing definitely for X amounts of the show up and attack try to attack like Nancy and Jonathan and at that point like they should be it being like precisely 11 like would be like on 11's way of like a path of like running away from like runners like energy laboratory like ending up running into like Jonathan and that monster and at that point I was bringing 11 like using all of 11's like current powers to like most likely scare away or like attack that monster and at that point I was bring like that sort of like using so much of like 11's like superpower and especially after like 11 right now itself like especially just like 11 right now itself has nose blade and was on top of that like at that point like when 11 would be most likely using all of the strength, current strength to basically to attack like that monster even though I'm going to bring like the monster possibly like get scared and would be like escaping and running away like I'm still 11 most likely going unconscious at that point from like the extreme exhaustion is like also like anyway the scenario that I'm going to bring I'm going to bring. Yes, so like definitely my the impression right now with like the whole heated argument between like Nancy and Jonathan right now. Definitely my the impression is definitely that ever since like Mike had and Will have became friends like I'm also ever since then like I'm also like without much great delay at all like Nancy as well as like Jonathan might have seen each other like they might have totally had like a family outing or something together like the family of like Mike as well as like the family of Will at that point might have had a outing together back then. So also like about that about of what might have happened. So like back then might have been like the first time they went for such an outing might have been when like I'm due to like solely due to like Mike and Will being friends like solely due to the friendship like I'm like through that outing might have been like the first time back when back then when like Jonathan might have first seen Nancy. It's definitely might have been and back then like Jonathan might have straight away totally liked Nancy so much because like back then Nancy might have been totally different. Like Nancy back then might have been someone who was totally perfectly okay with like being different, being like exactly the way she is. Like Nancy might that then might have been someone like John that might have been totally fine with like embracing like the way she is like her true self. It's definitely my first language. So like this might have been like such a major factor that might have totally drawn Jonathan towards like Nancy, like towards like extreme towards like having that such extreme affectionate feelings towards like Nancy back then. It's definitely my first impression. Yet like I'm going to bring back then like Jonathan might have definitely not exactly like the person like even back then like I'm assuming Jonathan might have definitely not had like the courage to like express his like affectionate feeling and tell Nancy about like how he feels about Nancy, how he likes Nancy and all that. It's definitely my favorite. Yet like they might have totally interacted while like during the whole combined family outing like I'm assuming during that like I'm assuming Jonathan might have spent a lot of time with that Nancy and they might have interacted a lot and everything. They might have gotten along well back then. It was definitely my favorite relation. And I'm also like over the years, like all that might have changed as like Nancy might have totally felt insecure as like the majority of her classmates like were like at that point like eventually might have been like totally trying to like fit in. So like at that point like Ambassador Nancy might have slowly started to feel insecure and that false comfort that she might have felt in like embracing herself and being herself like that might have slowly turned into like insecurity within Nancy. What might have happened especially with the friend. While in the case of Jonathan, like he might have been totally not had such insecurity and he might have totally been still as he grew up, like he might have been totally okay with like embracing like the way he is like and Johnson while Johnson might have definitely never tried to like fit in and also on the other hand like Nancy as she grew up like might have like the insecurity within Nancy might have been formed and so like to not maybe to not get made fun of by like the remaining of her classmates like Nancy might have really tried to like fit in and to might have tried to do what's like popular and what's like accepted by like and what's like considered as cool by like the majority of like her classmates might have been what might have happened and then she might have since then might have really went like fit in and like that might have been how like when like Jonathan might have been like extremely Jonathan might have definitely noticed this and Jonathan might have been extremely disappointed in Nancy but like Jonathan still might have definitely not had the courage at all to like tell Nancy that basically what he felt about like what Nancy was doing was wrong. Even though Jonathan strongly felt that what Nancy was doing was wrong, like yet like Jonathan might have definitely not had like the courage to tell that to Nancy. Is what might have happened. Like yet, like Jonathan, even though might have he might have been disappointed in Nancy, he might have still have that strong affectionate feelings towards Nancy. Definitely, even that is definitely one of those rebels, and that might have been when like Nancy might have usually like fallen in love with like Steve, it's definitely my book is very important. So also definitely my book is very important. Like Jonathan definitely won't be might definitely not at all be a prejudice, but like Jonathan might know Steve way more than and it's also like about the that maybe like Jonathan might have seen like Steve like totally acting like a bully in like the past, which might have been something that Nancy might have might not be at all aware of. It's definitely my book. The only time Nancy might have it might have been like the very first time Nancy might have seen Steve acting in like a bully like manner. Like the first time Nancy might have seen that might have been like when Steve had like basically shown off like all the photographs and I think like destroyed like Johnson cameras like but like in the case of Jonathan, like I'm he might have maybe in like the past he might have knew he might have observed Steve as in like the past as well. He might have like basically maybe in like the past he might have like just happened to like witness Steve totally acting like a fully in like the past against like some other person. It's definitely another agreement. So like Jonathan definitely like not liking Steve might not have to do like Jonathan being like a friend. It's also like my considering. So Jonathan might certainly only know more about Steve that like even currently in like the person that Nancy might not be aware of. Definitely know the person. So like definitely the impression right now is that like even in like the current heated argument with between like Nancy and Jonathan in like the present like basically like Jonathan would be right now venting out like everything that he wanted so badly to tell Nancy for all these years. Yet like except for his like affectionate feelings towards Nancy, like all the other things about like what he felt that everything Nancy was doing was like totally wrong. Like Nancy the really trying to fit in and all that like that which like Jonathan had been feeling was like totally wrong for Nancy to do, which he might have felt from way back, from way from before great number of years. Like this, like Jonathan so badly wanted to tell Nancy, but didn't have the courage to. Right now, Jonathan would be like through this heated argument, like Jonathan would be right now letting it out and like bending all that out to Nancy, Stephanie, my friend, and it would be totally uh, like uh, like totally like it will be hitting Nancy at the spot. It's definitely also my personal understand because like Nancy right now while like Jonathan right now is like venting out to and saying all this to like Nancy like I'm just bringing Nancy deep down would be like deep down would be like totally it'd be deep down feeling that basically everything Jonathan is saying is true. Yet like I'm also bringing Nancy like embracing that truth would be like totally extremely out of like currently Nancy's like comfort zone. So like definitely Nancy would be too far too extremely insecure right now in like the present to be able to like embrace that truth like as she this in like the distant past is definitely my personal average, and this would be like the precise reason for like Nancy totally right now defending like Steve, and basically like deep down Nancy would be like aware that like deep down Nancy would be even right now having that feeling that basically, especially after like how insensitively Steve had basically like acted towards like the whole news and realization of like the missing of Barbara and everything. Like basically even at that point, like deep down, like Nancy might have felt that like Steve is definitely not the right person for like Nancy. Might have been like something like that Nancy might have realized deep down, even at that point, it's definitely my problem. Again, like Nancy might have been like might have not want that to like believe that it's definitely solely due to like Nancy's insecurity is definitely my problem. So like even right now, as like Johnson is like saying all this like I'm suffering, even though Nancy will be deep down, feeling that like what Johnson's saying is right, like still I'm suffering. Nancy will be right now due to her insecurity will be desperately trying to defend Steve, like and make herself believe, desperately believe that Steve is not a bad guy. Definitely my personal one, which I'm definitely protecting Steve to definitely without much great delay to prove wrong. It's definitely like the scenario that I'm considering, and at that point I'm also definitely protecting like Nancy, even like eventually having that after fight with like Steve and quarrel with like Steve, and at that point I'm also definitely protecting Nancy to like look Steve in like the face and tell Steve that basically Jonathan was right. Nancy at that point telling Steve that basically Jonathan was right all along. That you really are not a nice person. Like along the lines, I'm also definitely Nancy eventually like definitely realizing that like the hard way from Steve is like even the scenario that I'm considering, and that incident I'm considering definitely bringing Nancy and Jonathan a lot closer, and like the bond between them at Nancy and Jonathan at that point would be a lot deeper, and I'm considering like at that point like Nancy and Jonathan like they would be having that absolute perfect understanding between each other. And from that point on, it's like silence of scenario that I'm looking, and that's totally creating that absolute jealousy and frustration, and like that absolute dislike from Steve towards like both Nancy as well as Jonathan, and definitely and jealousy from Steve towards like Nancy and Jonathan, and so that like I'm from Steve not quitting from that point on until like Steve like turning into like sadistic kind of seems sadistic kind of like a villain, and basically from that point on and chemistry Steve not quitting, and like Steve totally being that being an extreme stalker from that point on, like basically stalking and he will be like totally stalking and also person to like Steve to like totally stalking, consistently stalking like Nancy as well as Jonathan with his intent to like basically get revenge somehow. Eventually, just like the scenario that I'm considering and I'm sitting on. But so like definitely the real question right now is that basically, even though right now like the heated argument between Jonathan and Nancy, even though Jonathan is like the precise person to like quickly try to like end that whole argument, like to be precisely because like Jonathan definitely feeling that like Nancy is not going to understand what like Jonathan would be saying, and like the last thing would be like Jonathan would even want would be definitely for like to have a fight or like an argument with like Nancy will be like the last thing Johnson would even want. That's definitely my preference because like Johnson later on will be like liking Nancy so much, like definitely also my preference. So like yeah, like my personal impression is that like since like Nancy right now even through like the current heated argument itself, like Nancy would have right now it is like in the case of an Nancy would be in that absolute confused state without like any clarity in like the things she is doing. It's definitely my opinion. Especially because of this reason, like everything Jonathan and in like the heated argument, like everything Johnson said, like deep down, like Nancy would be feeling that like it's like that. So yeah, like Nancy would want to like basically Nancy would be insecure and would want to like embrace that truth. So like definitely the confused and clueless Nancy will be like totally wanting that absolute validation and confirmation that like what she is currently doing, that everything she is currently doing, that is her friend sort of failure to fit in and everything. The she Nancy, like the closest Nancy right now will be wanting that absolute confirmation and validation that like what she is doing is right, and she would be right now wanting that validation from precisely Jonathan. was definitely my preferred emergency. So like precisely because of this reason, like I'm considering that there would be that like disturbance within like Nancy. So like I'm considering precisely because of this reason, I'm considering even though Jonathan has done like absolute best to like end the heated argument. I'm considering the argument will like once again start up again, and I'm going to be perfectly Nancy seeking that validation from like Jonathan that like what Nancy said is like right, like basically that way like Nancy and Protopin once again bringing out this very same topic once again, and basically once again an argument happening between like Nancy and Jonathan is like the scenario that I'm considering, but like I'm considering that argument only going out of hand and going out of control, and basically that argument, the next argument which I'm considering to happen would be resulting in like Nancy deciding feeling as if it was like an absolutely bad idea to basically even show up to like the Mukbang force to like to even to the help of like Johnson will be along the lines like Nancy will be thinking even coming to like Mukbang for to meet Johnson was like an absolute idea would be along the lines Nancy at that point would be thinking, and I was bring that second argument I'm looking bring to happen, and that resulting in like Nancy being extremely kind of like angry with like Jonathan, and Nancy deciding to like straight away leave and go and Nancy like putting up from like Jonathan and deciding to like leave Mapwood Forest by herself with like the scenario that I'm talking about. But like at that point, like even though Jonathan would be like confused like Jonathan won't be having like unlike Nancy and Jonathan not having like the emotions yet so that's coupled in the way of the like logical thinking that I'm considering Jonathan only telling going after Nancy and telling Nancy that basically that that like he would take Nancy back to at least to like where the roads are like basically Jonathan would be only concerned for like Nancy's safety for like Nancy also going walking through like the forest like neighborhood forest all by herself. So like and when Jonathan saying this and totally doing the absolute best to like basically uh, so along with like Nancy, but like I'm considering Nancy, that point being extremely angry with like Johnson, that like I'm considering Nancy possibly maybe even shouting at Johnson and telling him that like do not follow me along the lines. And I'm considering like Nancy that way, Johnson at that point not being able to do anything, and like Nancy like basically angrily walking away and like through the foot forest that Nancy all by herself would be like walking back, trying to make her way back to like the road. Those different like even before reaching the road on the different within like deep within the foot forest and those different like the most of creature like precisely show up and those different is precisely straight away targeting Nancy and is trying to like attack Nancy's like the scenario that I'm doing. But like I'm doing that and that time like definitely like Jonathan would have definitely decided to like still stealthily follow Nancy, definitely because of all that extreme concern that Jonathan will be having towards like Nancy's safety. It's definitely one of the things. But like Jonathan, but then that time would have like stealthily follow like Nancy to ensure that she's safe. So like especially when this like monster would be creature would be showing up and attacking Nancy. Like at that point, I'm basically Nancy being like so extremely scared and Nancy screaming and maybe like uh, and maybe like Nancy even shouting Jonathan's name is also like a scenario that I'm recovering. But like I'm recovering precisely because like Jonathan most likely at that point had having stealthily followed Nancy's the entire way. Like I'm recovering Jonathan at that point stealthily being able to like show up and I'm recovering like Jonathan like in his life and basically doing like absolutely everything to like stop the monster and I'm also monster creature and just I'm recovering like that attempt of like Jonathan and also bring Jonathan sustaining a certain level of injuries, multiple injuries from like the attacks of like the monster, like the scenario that I was doing. Yet like I was doing like Jonathan at that point, like showing his like absolute courage and basically risking his life and putting his life on the line and taking in all that injury just to like save Nancy, like the scenario that I was doing. That way, like Nancy getting that like at least even if it's like it would be like a subtle like vibe, like I'm doing still like Nancy getting that like hero. Nancy only seeing a hero in like Jonathan at that point is like also like film scenario that I was doing. Yet like I was doing even the monster like totally still like even like Jonathan trying to like stop the monsters like that not working out in like Jonathan's favor and Nancy's favor and setting them as a person that like all of like Nancy and Jonathan's effort are to stop the monster at that point failing, and the monster will be about to take Johnson's life under the bring precisely 11 showing up, and like 11 like using her superpowers and chasing away the monster is like the scenario that was against sitting on the North Korea. Okay, so like the Pune North Korean president right now was like Popper showing up to like Vince's home with like his mother being like the only person there, and basically with like the situation being lonely as well, being away from Vince's home. Like I'm considering like still, even though like his mother told Lonnie to like totally fully go away, and like I'm considering still that Lonnie would be like without much great delay at all, like Lonnie would be like returning back. Like the scenario that I'm considering, and especially when Lonnie would be like returning back definitely. Even then, like Hopper would be like person in like full smoke at that point. It's definitely my consideration. At that point, indoors it would be just like Hopper as well as like Will's mother alone. So that considering like Lonnie straight away showing up precisely, and during that, and I'm considering like Lonnie totally finding this out and seeing Hopper. And I'm considering at that point itself, like I'm considering like Lonnie going crazy and angry, and like maybe Lonnie even crazily like trying to like even fight and attack Hopper. It's also like the scenario that I was talking, even though Hopper is like chief sheriff, like still I'm considering Lonnie totally maybe losing it, and basically Lonnie trying to attack Hopper. And I was considering at that point like totally Hopper like totally overpowering Lonnie and like putting Lonnie in his place is like the scenario that I'm considering, and maybe like I'm considering like Tony maybe even trying to like attack with mother as well. It's also like a possibility that I'm considering. Definitely Hopper like putting Lonnie in his place, and like I'm considering it would be Hopper that would be like threatening Lonnie and telling at that point telling Lonnie to like never return to this home again, and basically like uh, with that like I'm considering like Lonnie being totally filled with that absolutely at that point. And Rosie Perkin like the step Lonnie taking like basically permanently leaving like Bill's home at that point is like the scenario that I'm looking at. After that, like I'm bringing Lonnie to like not return back at all to like Bill's home. It's like the scenario that I'm looking at, and my question right now. Okay, so like definitely my very understanding right now that like my current like basically following the compass like basically getting looped around, and like right now like ending up like on the direction of like heading back to their home. Like I'm considering it will be precisely 11 doing is definitely my consideration. Especially since like precisely in just earlier when like 11 had like the extremely afraid 11 like of like basically like obviously since like 11 will be like extremely afraid of like going up to like Brenner's laboratory following like the compass like since like certainly the compass would be like certainly leading to like Brenner's laboratory, and since like 11 is like so extremely afraid of like going back there precisely like when 11 had tried to make the excuse of like feeling tired to like Mike so that like they would like proceed further, and Mike had only refused to like stop. Like at that point itself, like 11 having like the nose bleed will be precisely because of like 11 at that point coming up with the idea and strategy to like precisely use 11 superpowers to like control like not a single compass but like each of like the compass like Mike Dustin as well as like Lucas were holding with that absolute sync and coordination so that like it would be like precisely point simultaneously equally pointing to like equally like 11 would have totally changed like slightly and slowly changed like the direction of like the compass in such a manner that like that would have been what like precisely might have resulted in like Mike and his friends like right now ending up like looping around and walking all the way up to like ending up in like square direction back towards him. It definitely would be like 11's doing and 11's strategy. It's definitely my personal impression. And okay, so like definitely my personal impression right now is like Lucas right now creating this whole scene and making this whole fight and so on between like Mike and Justin and 411. Like I'm also going that definitely it might have to do my personal impression might have to do with like I thought Lucas being like the most nailed one among like Mike and Captain. Also, and the person like maybe might have to do with that maybe like Lucas totally like so casually forgetting that basically precisely after like Will's body was found like basically like was uh was found like at that point, like basically by all of them were like totally genuinely had basically believed that like including Lucas, Mike as well as Russell, all of them had fully believed that Will had died. Like even at that point, like it was solely due to like Eleven using her powers to and like showing Mike Will's voice through like the radio phone was like the sole reason for like them right now even being having like the realization right now as for like Will even still being alive. Like basically the fact that like they are even aware of that and they can actually at least do even the current things that they are even doing in their attempt to like find Will, like the fact that they can even do what they are doing right now in like the present, it's only because like them having that realization that will that like the body is like the body of Will that was found is not like the body of like that children. And that realization was solely possible solely through 11. So like basically so instead of being grateful for 11 like I'm also bringing like the reason for like Lucas right now like blaming 11 so much and getting angry with like Mike as well as Dustin like would be solely look like maybe like Lucas being such like the naivest one among like Mike and Dustin. That's like one possibility that I'm also bringing. Or like the other only other possibility that I'm also bringing is maybe because like Lucas might be even to like the person maybe even thinking along the lines of Lucas probably would be like also confused, seems to be confused as well. It's definitely not going to say much. Lucas from like the beginning having that experience of vision towards like 11 from like the very beginning might have eventually resulted in like maybe like Lucas even right now in like the person after even hearing Will's the interaction between like Will as well as like his mother through the radio phone like Lucas might be even right now to possibly maybe would be such an extremely confused state that he might be even thinking that basically this 11 has superpowers like what they had heard through the radio at the Hawkins school, like the voices of like the interaction between like Will and his mother. That might have also been like 11 using this like using her superpowers to like trick Mike and just might be even along the extreme lines extend to which like in a confused manner Lucas would be right now thinking. It's also like the other possibility that I'm also putting and him being like that possibly being the reason for like Lucas being so even to the person right now being so extremely ungrateful towards like everything Eleven has done while when compared to like and that being solely due to like the Lucas possibly being like extremely suspicious or like extremely naive or by like Mike as well as like Dustin are like would be like way more like would be able to like think way more logically than like Lucas and possibly would be and would be way more grateful would be having that gratitude feeling of gratitude when compared to Lucas would be like the reason for like Mike as well as not just Mike but as well as like Dustin as well totally being against like Lucas like plays even right now in like the person blaming 11 so much is definitely my personal impression. Okay, so like definitely my personal impression right now is that basically like with like Lucas going unconscious and basically Mike being totally cross with like 11. Because they're definitely putting like 11 right now totally like Mike and not just definitely my personal impression. And like I'm also bringing it, it was like it might have definitely been like witnessing like Lucas attack Mike like from 11's point of view, 11 might have totally seen that as like someone so precious to 11, someone 11 like so much like the only person 11 right now likes uh, that thing would definitely Mike alone and like 11 would be liking like Mike a lot. So like seeing 11 might have only seen that as like Mike being is someone so precious to 11 being in danger. So like 11 might have not definitely like 11 might have like at that moment like seeing that like 11 might have not been able to definitely control 11 power. Like and I'm also brings that to be like an issue as well with like 11 where like whenever someone pushes to 11 like and I'm also bringing like Mike would be like the only person in 11's life that would be like only 11 would be seeing as like precious to 11 step 11 was membership. 11 might not know who 11's mother is definitely my birthday, but maybe 11 might not know like the concept of mother is also definitely my birthday, but maybe 11 might have even to the present day, 11 would be totally think that 11 only has Papa, and that's like run up. It's definitely also my perspective. Yet like 11 totally would be like in the present, like 11 will be having that extreme dislike and extreme rage as well, might definitely be present within her right now towards like run up. So like Mike would be like the only person in like 11's life that 11 has like this definitely my best of impression. 11 would be like liking Mike so much. It's definitely my best thing. So like I was wondering, even though right now Mike is totally crossed with like 11. Was definitely preferring like for like a Mike. And still my secondary impression right now is that like so without much delay at all, like without Mike and Dustin having to take like Lucas to like the hospital or anything. Like even before that, I was the scenario that I was bringing is for like Lucas to be able to like regain back to like a conscious, like the scenario that I'm about to bring in. I'm about to bring like most likely like either Dustin or like Mike like basically bringing most likely Dustin bringing a bit of water like or like they have water bottle but thing like so basically like sprinkle water onto like Lucas and the bring will be most likely what like the scenario would be like as to, like how Lucas would be gaining back to like consciousness like the scenario that I'm about to bring. And at that point itself, I was extremely angry with like Mike and 11 at that point. That I'm also bring like Lucas straight away getting up and like telling Mike to like not touch him. And basically Lucas straight away angrily like heading back home himself while telling Mike Dustin as well as like 11 that basically that he's going to Lucas is going to like find Will and save Will by himself. That's like the scenario that I'm looking for. And at that point, even though Mike would be like totally cross with like 11, and but still like that anger to like not get the best of Mike. And I'm also trying like definitely Mike would be able to like think in his like Mike would be able to still think sensibly. And I'm also trying like Mike definitely still, even though Mike would be like cross with like 11, I'm considering like Mike still to like take 11 back to my sick home is like the scenario that I'm considering and my future impression. So like I'm considering like Dustin heading back to his home is like the scenario that I'm considering. And also my personal impression is for like the possible angel scenarios like after this incident like precisely as like Mike would be deciding to like take 11 back. Even though Mike would be cross with 11, still like Mike would be deciding to like take 11 back to his home. But like precisely as Mike would be like making his way towards his home. Like I'm considering what like 11 would be like suddenly once again showing that that's what clear, and Mike would be totally at that point getting so extremely angry with like 11 again at that point of that scenario that I'm considering. So at that like then like I'm whispering right then itself Mike top 11 maybe like showing Mike as to like or like 11 totally running away is like also like the scenario that I'm whispering. So maybe at that point like I'm whispering like Mike either like see like from a distance like I'm whispering Mike would be able to like see his home, and I'm whispering like Mike totally seeing like someone like a car parked outside of like Michael's home, and like maybe people entering like Michael's home and leaving Michael's home. It's like scenario that I'm in. So like by now like I'm considering expectations like runner and his team had basically heard the conversation of like uh Mike and his friends like hearing like the conversation between like through the school radio, or like the conversation uh between like Will and Will's mother. Like definitely my personal impression is that like definitely by now like Pranav might have totally sent his team to like basically search through like the and by now like Pranav and might have totally figured out like the names of the precise uh, three forfeits that were in that precise radio room in school precisely during that time, who used the radio school radio precisely during that time. And like so the names Mike, Dustin, and Lucas might have totally right now by now like Brandon might have found that basically like Mike, Lucas, and Dustin, and like the and I'm also bring like through that science teacher like one of like Brandon's like teams like might have even talked to like the science teacher and might have figured like uh, there being like a girl as well in that school radio room really during that time. So like I'm also bringing runner might have only figured that that would definitely be 11. So like I'm also bringing especially as like Mike's would be most likely the scenario that I'm also bringing like especially as like Mike would be deciding to like head back home with like 11 and possibly from like a distance, like Mike totally seeing the car and like people entering and leaving Mike's home from like a distance. So like at that point, like 11 was possibly like telling Mike that like uh, like basically something that basically like would be like giving Mike that at that point like Mike would be realizing that basically like going home is like danger from what 11 would be saying. So like at that point itself like Mike is deciding not to like take 11 to home. And I'm also saying like Mike at that point would be realizing that those people are after 11. So like I'm wondering at that point like I'm wondering like Mike deciding to and probably like Dustin as well as like Lucas would be heading over to their home like I'm wondering them as well like I'm wondering maybe be getting like questioned by these like people who would be like sometimes would be searching like the homes of Dustin as well as Lucas as well as so, like Dustin as well as Lucas being questioned and I was wondering like Lucas as well as Dustin totally like and I was wondering like then at that point, like I was wondering, like Brenner's team won't be able to like do anything at all to like League of or like Dustin precisely because of like Brenner still not knowing where 11 is. So like Brenner was only seeing like Mike, Dustin, and Lucas as like the keys to like for him to be able to like find 11. So like maybe because of this reason, like Brenner would be deciding not to take the life of like neither Mike, Lucas, or Dustin for like the time being. It's like the scenario that I was wondering. So like I'm considering like Mike decide at that point deciding to like basically take 11 to like castle by yourself like the scenario that I'm considering and I'm considering this would be like the point most likely the point where like Mike would be most likely taking 11 to castle by yourself like that would be the idea that at that point like that Mike would be possibly getting slow so like definitely Mike taking the impression maybe like that way like Mike taking 11 to castle by yourself so, like the scenario that I'm observing, or like I'm observing maybe like Mike deciding to take 11 to Castle Buyers and like while in order to do that like since like Castle Buyers will be most likely I think like using like the 3% like the cost of month road like I'm observing because like, Mike would be making his way to, like 11 towards that location I'm observing maybe by then like I'm observing like the more freeze up might be showing up and might have attacked Nancy and like Jonathan and Nancy struggling against like the monster creature within like the Northwood Forest happening during that time and especially coincidentally that time like Mike Rishi like it is on his way trying to take get 11 to Castle Buyers. So like I was bringing them totally running into like the situation and I was bringing even 11 from a distance being able to like at that point sense that the presence of like monster creature. So like 11 totally running off ahead and 11 totally saving like Nancy as well as like Jonathan is like what scenario that kind of thing and them totally Mike as well totally meeting up with like his sister Nancy as well as Jonathan there in like the post and basically them discussing information, exchanging information and like Mike telling Nancy and Jonathan to like keep like the information about 11 secret and basically like then and those are like maybe it wouldn't just be Mike like I'm like Nancy as well as Jonathan realizing about next 11 that 11 is like the key to like save Will as well as Barbara, like basically Nancy as well realizing that like as well as Jonathan and basically them collectively like basically like them collectively being aware that basically of like Michael's decision to like have 11 hide in like Castle Bios is like the scenario that I'm doing. So like that much is like living the scenario that I'm looking at. And as for like and my very impression as for Lucas, I was wondering Lucas still possibly would be like getting by the time Lucas would be reaching home, like I was wondering Lucas maybe being questioned by Brenner's team members and like Lucas and was still not being scared and like maybe like Lucas being determined to like save Will and like I'm wondering without much trade delay in like the coming days like I'm wondering Lucas by himself like carrying the compass like Lucas by himself, like trying to find like the portal and him ending up reaching like precisely like the fences of like Brenner's laboratory, outer fences of like Brenner's laboratory, and like by the laboratory like the hole in like the fence that the Hopper had created during his infiltration by then would have been totally quickly fixed by Brenner's team is like my everything. So like Lucas and Brenner not being able to like find an opening through like the fences. So like I was doing instead like Lucas like totally circling around like the fences and like reaching like the main entrance like pathway, the horse pathway into like Brenner's laboratory. So like I'm going to bring like Lucas trying to like stealthily trying to infiltrate into like Brenner's laboratory, but like I'm also bringing like the security guards like capturing Lucas is like the scenario that I'm going. So like maybe like that way like Lucas basically kept imprisoned in like Brenner's laboratory for like the time being. Like also like the scenario that I'm looking at, maybe Brenner deciding to like properly interrogate Lucas is also like the scenario that I'm looking at. And at that point like I'm also bringing by then like eventually Mike and Dustin like finding out about like Lucas disappearing. So like I'm also bringing like them asking 11 as like where Lucas is, and then also bring like 11 will be able to like sense that basically that like Lucas has been captured and is present in like Brenner's laboratory. But like at that point, I'm also bringing for 11, like even though 11 will be extremely afraid of like going back to like Brenner's laboratory, I'm also bringing like even though 11 would be extremely scared, like I'm also bringing like still 11 would be like for 11 at that point would be the feeling that absolute guilt of like basically hurting Lucas and basically Lucas ending up being in like an unconscious state and basically all that like basically 11 at that point maybe possibly feeling guilty that it was because of 11 that like Lucas eventually got captured and all that like will be along the lines 11 will be thinking and especially because of all this reason I'm considering maybe like 11 that actually like even while being extremely scared like deciding to like help Mike as well as like Dustin to save 11 to save Lucas and that way like I'm considering maybe like Mike, Dustin and 11 like totally actually succeeding in like using 11's like superpowers solely due to like 11 having superpowers on the different like Mike and of actually succeeding in like infiltrating into in like the middle of the night like 11 might be also knowing like since 11 has spent a lot of the majority of 11's like life in like almost like the entirety of like 11's life so far like in like within like Brenner's laboratory like 11 might be aware as to like when like the like security would be high in like Brenner's laboratory and everything. Like when there would be like the maximum people would be like present in like Brenner's laboratory at which time it like would be like perfect to like infiltrate into like Brenner's laboratory and all that like maybe everyone would be aware of. So like I'm just like that way like coupled with like 11 superpowers like and like 11 like knowledge and also bring like Mike and Dustin along with like 11 like stealthily infiltrating in like the middle of the night infiltrating into like Brenner's laboratory and them saving Dustin and them saving like Lucas and like I'm also like Mike at that point they will be like so desperately wanting to like explore Brenner's laboratory and like basically find out where the portal is. At that point, like they will be like only seeing how like the compass is like pointing. Sorry, at that point they will be having like the compass. Maybe like Lucas will be having the compass like and they will be seeing how like the compass is like pointing straight even into like a location into like that certain direction within like Brenner's laboratory. So like even though Mike, Lucas and Dustin would want to like explore like still able to bring like by then like one of like the security guards of like Brenner's laboratory like maybe like by then like a lot of like security guards like showing up to like capture them and everything. So like at that point like them not being able to proceed further. So like at that point like just like 11 still using her superpowers like 11 going up to her limit and basically 11 using all of her superpowers basically somehow struggling into like basically succeeding in like escaping like Brenner's laboratory and saving Lucas like and Mike Lucas and Dustin along with like 11 successfully escaping from Brenner's laboratory and like bring like them running off successfully being able to like hide maybe in like the Mercos forest somewhere and maybe like bring like as Brenner's team would be like uh searching for like 11 in like the forest maybe like at that point like uh the monsters reach up to like show up and attack like Brenner's team. So like uh that attack from like the monsters reach up creating like the opening for like 11 as well as like Mike and Dustin and all of them to be able to like escape from there. And so like I'm even them essentially taking 11 to once again to like Castle Fire and basically Mike, Dustin and Lucas basically heading back to their home and suddenly entering like the home in like the middle of the night. It's like the scenario that I'm about to bring. So like I'm about to bring like runner like even though runner would have once again failed to like capture 11 like runner at that point like checking the CCTV in like his lab and like him seeing like everything that has happened, everything about like the infiltration of like my Candice friends and basically everything that they did within that runner's lab and everything. So like by then like it's like the scenario. So like through that CCTV like I'm observing runner and the science team like basically learning a lot about like 11 and Mike and Dustin and Lucas and basically it's like clinical this much is like clinical scenario that I'm preparing right now in my history and and also definitely my first impressions that like according to my first impression after like saving Lucas like solely due to like 11 like Mike and Dustin being able to like save eventually save Lucas from captivity within like Bruno's laboratory and like while being in captivity in Bruno's laboratory I'm supposed to bring Lucas will be like totally strangest here uh, and I'm supposed to bring like Mike Mike Dustin and 11 saving Lucas and I'm supposed to bring like and since at that point it would be solely to like 11 cells alone that like Lucas would have gotten to the cure. Like I'm just bring from that point on, I'm just bring like that whole dislike that Lucas has towards like 11 specifically, like I'm just bring like to this right away gone and basically Lucas being so extremely grateful and like appreciating like having 11 as like a friend and basically that absolute bond of friendship between like Mike Dustin as well as like and 11 and Lucas like basically that absolute friendship actually being like totally being strongly formed at that point is like the scenario that I was bring like and from that point on like Lucas as well as Dustin recognizing 11 as like their true friend as like a member of like their gang which is like the scenario that I was bringing my impression and my secondary interaction, especially for like during that eventual rescue mission of like Lucas that like Mike Dufton and 11 would be doing. I'm about to bring like during that I'm about to bring like while they would be like infiltrating into like Brenner's laboratory and exploring within like Brenner's laboratory to find Lucas and save Lucas. Like I'm about to bring during that time it's when I'm about to bring like Mike as well as Dustin would be like shockingly finding out the truth about 11, how 11 was like in prison in like Brenner's laboratory and about like the all the experiments like half experiments like that 11 had to like go through and face and basically everything like about like the sufferings that 11 had gone through basically for all these past years like basically and that being the reason for like 11's like extreme fear and everything like basically at least a rough idea of all that like I'm also putting like Dustin as well as Mike realizing through that during that whole exploration into like Brenner's lab it would be at that point that like Mike as well as Dustin would be like finding out about it like the scenario that I'm bring, and I'm bring like Lucas as well would be like finding out about it after like being abducted by Brenner's and it would be and while Lucas will be getting into something like Brenner's lab it's like the scenarios that I'm looking and then that way like after gaining that realizing that truth like they would be like totally from that point on would be totally extremely appreciating 11 like basically 11's friendship and everything is definitely my personal impression as for like the eventual scenario that I'm looking to bring. Okay, so I'm definitely the ambition right now as for like the experiment of like Brenner that basically right now 11 is like remembering that like 11 is in like the water and communicating and that considering like 11 thing was like a Russian man like I'm especially since he's like wearing clothes that basically suited for like cold weather like I'm also bring like definitely my personal impression that like that's like a Russian man who's like photo as well that basically Brenner has showed 11 even before like the communication numbers bring like that would be precisely like the Russian leader of this definitely my first impression. So like Brenner would be like well and fully like maybe like Brenner might actually have believed in like the possibility of like a parallel world or like multiple parallel worlds existing. So like they are like Brenner like Brenner might have totally expected, might have been hoping for like there to exist like the parallel world to for there to like totally exist like the this parallel version of like the Russian leader in like the real world who would be looking exactly like him would be along the lines runner would be totally expecting, and that would be the precise reason for like runner, like the precise black and white photo that the runner might have showed might have been like the photo of like the uh, of like the Russian leader in like the real world. It's definitely my very impression. So and like the practice parallel version would be what like 11 might right now might be like communicating with and basically seeing in like the whole communication dimension, dark dimension. Definitely my parallel dimension is definitely my very impression right now. So like definitely my very impression right now is that basically like the precise words in like Russian that basically that person, that Russian person will be most likely like the Russian parallel version of like the Russian leader, like what he would be saying in Russian number will be precisely like orders that he will be like giving to either his like army soldiers or like to like the public in Russia to basically like and it will be precisely what will be said in Russian will be precisely like him saying that they have to fight with everything they have got to like prevent like the apocalypse in like the parallel world. And about bring like an apocalypse like situation might be what might have precisely then might have been going on in like the parallel world precisely was like about to bring all that possibly having uh, occurred due to solely due to like the parallel version of Brenner, like his experiments on like the parallel version of 11 going around and basically 11 turning into like a humanoid like monsters like creature definitely what might have happened, and like that creature might have totally like definitely might have like something in my personal impression that it might have laid eggs and like multiple it might have that way multiplied lay eggs by itself, and it might have like multiplied. This monster creatures might have multiplied and maybe might have like caused like a large scale extension of like wipeout of like the majority of the human population in like the parallel world might have been what might have happened. And so like this might have been seen as like an apocalypse like kind of like a situation by by like all the leaders of the and I'm considering like it would be certainly what the Russian leader would be saying if it's for Russian language. I'm considering might be that him saying basically that like each and every citizen and not just the soldiers but like each and every citizen have no other option but to like basically fight and like stop with apocalypse. That would be along the lines that the dialogue the leader would be saying, which like Brenner might have heard at that point. It's definitely my previous. So like I'm assuming without much delay at all, like Brenner straight away like translating that Russian those Russian words, and I'm assuming like again for possibly like shockingly finding out like the translation to be something along such lines, like the scenario that I'm assuming. And I'm assuming this would be like the first time that Brenner might have been able to like basically access like the parallel world, and he even hear any voice from like the parallel world. This might have been like sort of time. It's also like the limit of the energy. Or like the other positives that basically since like before the experiment itself, like 11 had said asked like Brenner if it's like the path like about to bring maybe like Brenner might have tried out this very same experiment with like 11 in like the past as well, and maybe like those times as well like his attempt might have succeeded, or like it might have like each of those times like the experiment it like in like the whole bath might have failed for like 11 each and every single time in like the past when 11 had tried. Maybe this might be like currently like the first time that 11 is like succeeding. So like maybe if that's the scenario, then this will be the first time that Brenner might have been able to like hear any sort of anything from like the parallel world. It's definitely also my personal emotion. So like either this or like I'm something like Brenner might have heard dialogues from other people as well, from other leaders as well, maybe in like the past using this very same experiment with like 11 and like why people were possibly knowing like what this experiment is beforehand. Definitely also my personal reaction. So like anyway, that one possibility is like it will be through translation of this Russian dialogue that basically Brenner might be shockingly realizing that basically like the parallel world from apocalypse kind of like an event is like going on is like the possible scenario that I'm also predicting and my personal reaction. So like basically it's about the repression and also bring like the translation of like the Russian dialogue to basically what the might have relative and that then to like run of that like some sort of like an apocalyptic apocalypse kind of like an event is going on in like happening in like that parallel world. Still able to bring like run up solely due to his like extreme overconfidence might have felt that it would be like a good idea to like still like increase like the power of like train and increase like the power of 11 to like basically using that power to like amplify like the energy sources in like the laboratory of like Brenner and basically to create like a portal to like the parallel world like for Brenner to even still think that but that might have been what might have happened. It might have been after the incident of like this like communication by 11 hearing the Russian dialogue and everything. Like it might have been definitely after that like basically the portal might have definitely been created by Brenner and his team into the laboratory. Definitely might have been so like Runner might have still felt that it might have been like a good idea to like basically open up such a portal to like the parallel world solely and Runner even thinking along such lines might be solely due to like that absolute overconfidence of Runner. It's also definitely a possibility that I'm about to bring on my cultural impression. So like basically my cultural impression right now is that basically till like 11th experiment like basically after like 11 hearing like the dialogue communicating and hearing like the dialogue of like the Russian man who was bring would be possibly like the parallel version of the Russian year. After that, like in that dark intermediate like connecting dimension, like the precise snarling sound that like 11 heard. So the obviously the sound of like not just like any monster humanoid creature, but like I'm considering it to be like the sound of like that the sound of like that monster creature that 11 heard will be like the precise sound of like the parallel version of 11 in like the parallel world that might have been solely due to like the parallel version of Chronos like experiment going wrong having turned into like the parallel version of like the turned into like the humanoid like monster like basically that would be like the mother monster like the mother of all the remaining monsters that might have like totally spread throughout like the entire the parallel world is definitely about that mother of all those monsters would be like the parallel version, which would in actuality would be like at one point would have been like the parallel version of 11. It's definitely my personal impression that I'm still thinking of, and it would be precisely the snarling sound of that precise parallel version of 11 turned into that monster that basically like 11 might have totally heard as soon as like after that dialogue of that the Russian man. It's definitely my personal theory and impression. Okay, so like definitely my personal impression right now as for like 11 right now remembering like having like the memories of like thinking of like the memories of like the voice snarling voice of like the monster of creature during like the experiments back in like Arnold's lab right now precisely as like uh 11 had actually attacked like Lucas and Pacific. Definitely so my personal impression right now is that basically what 11 would be like totally clearing way a whole lot extremely way more than even burn up or even getting trapped in like the energy laboratory would be that 11 and like totally like getting captured by that monster creature is definitely my personal impression. So like that monster creature is definitely my personal impression right now would be what like 11 feels like more than anything at all. It's definitely my personal impression, which is the precise reason for like back when 11 was in like Mike's home, like in like Mike's basement, like even at that point during Stunter, like basically the fact that 11 was like getting scared so much would be like not at all due to like 11 actually fearing Stunter, but like since like electricity is connected to like the powers of like these monster creatures, these monster creatures can travel uh, through using like energy so electrical energy source like different like since electricity is connected to these monster faceless monster creatures like anticipating people will due to that extreme fear of like 11 remembering those monster creatures like the moment like 11 heard like the electricity that might have been the better reason for like 11 fearing thunder so much is definitely my personal image. Okay, so like definitely not on the reimbursement right now, but like also that not only just like Andrew just leaving like Mike and Dustin, but also like 11 as well leaving Mike. Like I'm just wondering that maybe I'm also preparing for like a time skip to that totally happen. So it's like also like a definitely possible scenario that I was different. So that's it right now, and I'm also preparing like right now with like also Nancy as well as Jonathan like exploring like some of the force like in that and it being like extremely dark as well. I'm also preparing like maybe definitely right now prepping for like the right now definitely I'm also impressions definitely for like the monster creature to like most likely show up, and I'm also preparing right then like specifically my first impression for like Jonathan as well as like Nancy thought is struggling to like stop like the monster creature, but still I'm also preparing like even though 11 would be like so extremely afraid, like I'm saying, like 11 would have decided to like leave my Ken's friend. So like as 11 would be like and on 11's 11 would be decided to like leave my Ken's friends and basically uh to go deep into like the Northwood Forest and hide somewhere in like Northwood Forest might be like 11's decision. So like I'm also bringing 11 just happening to like basically here like the voice of like Nancy as well as like Jonathan from like a distance, like as they were just struggling to like keep to fight off like the monster creature. It's like the scenario that I'm considering. So like at that point I'm considering like maybe somehow I'm considering like 11 to totally overcome 11's fears at that point, and I'm considering for just that brief moment I'm considering 11 won't be able to like especially I'm considering maybe like 11 would be also having that guilt deep down within 11 for like maybe especially since like 11 might have maybe even witnessed like since abduction by like the monster trees or even chasing after will like maybe all that like also I'm considering maybe in like the very beginning like maybe 11 might have even witnessed that. It's also definitely my Instagram version. So like maybe 11 would be also having possibly having that guilt within 11, but especially right now, especially like 11 right now would be like when I'm fully aware as to like how precious and how much important it is to like my and his like friend and all that. So like I'm considering that coupled with like the entire day not going well for 11, like everything like I'm considering like maybe 11 briefly at that moment like 11 like while the scenario I'm considering would be like 11 within like the Mercos forest like from at a distance like hearing like the cries of help from like from Nancy as well as Jonathan. So like I'm thinking maybe at that point, like for like a brief moment, like 11 somehow managing to like have to gain courage and like and overcoming somehow for a brief moment, like 11 overcoming her fears and really 11 only rushing towards like that location, even though 11 would be strongly be able to like sense like the presence of like that monster creature, like 11 still rushing in to help, and I'm also bring like 11 at that point using 11's like powers like superpowers like 11 like totally attacking like the monster creature, and that resulting in like the monster creature like able to bring to temporarily decide to like run away. It's like the scenario that I'm looking that way, like at that point like 11 saving like Nancy as well as like Jonathan, and Jonathan and Nancy like shockingly seeing like this kid 11, and like they'll get only confused as to like who this kid is like and how this kid has like superpowers and all that like basically and what about like what just happened, like Jonathan and Nancy will be only confused. But like I'm considering that would be the last point when like for the time being until like this time skip, like I'm considering uh, and for the current time being, I'm also bringing that to be the last point when, like, first and last time, while Jonathan as well as Nancy will be seeing 11. And I'm also bringing, like, right then itself, like, Jonathan, I'm also bringing, or Nancy, like, trying to, like, communicate with, like, 11, trying to ask something to 11, like, basically ask the like, who are you, like, basically, who are you, or, like, how did you do that, like, along us, like, that. But, like, right then itself, like, 11, totally running away from them. And, like right then itself, like Mike would be like chasing after 11, would be like showing up to that precise location, and Mike's being shocked to see like Jonathan as well as especially my sister like Nancy there in like the middle of like in the middle of the night in like deep in like Mudwood Forest. So they're all seeing each other and them all being shocked. So like and in that shock, like Mike totally forgetting about 11. And like by then like 11 like running away and gaining a lot of distance, and so like I'm considering while Mike would be like only temporarily forgetting about 11 and interacting with like Jonathan as well as like Nancy, like like at that point I was bringing firstly for like them to also like exchange like the information like between them like and like Nancy was only asking Mike as like what he's doing there and who's 11 and along this lines and basically like Mike asking like Nancy what she was doing there and basically like that conversation eventually interaction resulting in like them exchanging information that everything they know so far. But like yet like I'm considering them three collectively searching for 11. It's also like a scenario that I'm considering, but like them not being able to like find 11. So like at that point, Nancy as well as like Mike returning back to their home, while Jonathan would be returned back to his home. So like with that like I'm considering like the that to be like the and with that, like I'm considering like from like the next day on, like basically Mike as well as like Dustin meeting up and like them I'm considering Mike using like the radio phones to like try to contact like Lucas. Like Dustin as well would be trying to contact Lucas, but like Lucas totally not at all picking up the phone. And I'm considering like the next day Mike and Dustin to like meet up. And like Mike still being worried that he can't find 11. And I'm also bringing like the next day as well, like them totally searching maybe in like the prospect method, but like Mike and Dustin searching all throughout like the prospect method, but them totally being unable to like find 11. So like with that, like I'm also bringing like them realizing the importance and value of like 11. That basically like Mike and Dustin maybe at that point feeling us like they can't take a step forward in like to find Will without uh, without like 11 would be along the lines. And I'm also bring like maybe like the scenario to be like Mike and at that point I was bring like Mike would be so totally being worried for like 11 like definitely by then like Mike would have not been, have that have that extreme affectionate feelings towards like 11 even though Mike does get angry with like 11 still Mike would genuinely have that absolute affectionate feelings towards like 11 is definitely my revelation. So like Mike totally being worried at that point, and like Mike and Dustin together searching like the entirety of like Northwood and like the search as well, like uh, uh ending up with like absolutely no results with like them not being able to like find 11 at all. So like at that point, I'm about to bring like Dustin totally telling Mike that to like let's just drop it, like let's just like stop or like we have lost like not only 11, but we have also lost like Dustin as well. Like we have also lost like Lucas as well. Like basically, let's just like and I'm considering like Dustin totally giving up at that point. Like the whole search for Will, like I'm considering maybe like Dustin totally giving up and like maybe like Dustin as well leaving Mike and like I'm considering like Mike totally returning back to his home. And maybe like and Mike at that point would be like totally on top of losing Will, like Mike, what would be affecting Mike so much would be like losing 11 at that point is like the scenario that I'm also playing. So like at that point I was worrying Mike or by himself like return back to his home and maybe like at that point I'm also trying like maybe for them to like even though they would be like Mike, Lucas and Dustin would be like totally disturbed and like totally sad like I'm also trying them still uh like for temporarily for like the time being like them like the times keep happening, like them maybe moving on with their lives, even though they would be down, that would be definitely not them. Like it would be like it would be totally again like their pro self to like basically move on from like the current situation. Still I'm considering like them exactly like a parallel kind of like a situation to like how Nancy had basically like betrayed her pro self and basically for a great number of past years, like, and I'm also wondering if that might have happened. So, like, I was wondering, like, in a similar manner, like, Mike Lucas as well as like the things like totally like straying away from their true self and like their true desire to like absolutely save will and everything. Like, and I'm also wondering, like, maybe Mike as well as like Dustin as well as like Lucas, like, continuing with their life trying to move on. But like I was wondering them totally being unable to like no matter what they try to like distract themselves with to like in their attempt to like move on from like the loss of like the disappearance of Will as well as for Mike for like the disappearance of 11 like still like they won't be able to like get over like the scenario that I'm covering. So like the time skips that were happening and like after a few years, like still the disappearance like remaining within like Mike Lucas and like Dustin, and that eventually resulting in like that disappearance and that disturbance that will be remaining within themselves, the three of them like eventually bringing them together after a few years and like considering that to be the time skip and like then like Mike Lucas as well as Dustin like meeting up and like they would be like actually meeting up and like actually interacting between each other like but then like I'm considering something happening at that point and that resulting in like them once again deciding to like basically them maybe like once again would be like deciding to like simply work to Mustard Forest and maybe in like Mustard Forest like when they would be like actually walking around like Mustard Forest in like the memories of like Will as well as as well as 11. At that point, I'm also bringing like them getting the biggest shock, but like the sense for us, like them totally seeing like 11, like a grown up 11, like basically somewhere at like a distance within like Mustard Forest. So like that to be how like I'm also bringing maybe eventually like the search for will to like basically and to eventually get continued with like maybe like them all running after 11 and I'm also bringing like that day them not being able to like find 11 they would be able to recognize 11, even though 11 would have grown up a bit. So less still able to bring them, Mike able being able to recognize 11 and then something through like the grown up Mike, Dustin as well as like Lucas running through like Mustard Forest trying to like find 11, but like them not being able to find 11 and able to bring the very next day maybe like them totally desiring thinking of in like the memories of like will like able to bring them desiring to like just uh, just go up to Castle Bios and maybe like while they would be like showing up to Castle Bios at that point, like them finding maybe like the grown up 11 like sleeping in that secret home of like Castle Bios is like the scenario. And from that point on, like their search for will like once again continuing is like the other possible scenario that I'm looking. And until that point, I'm also Hopper as well as like Will's mother would be frantically and desperately trying to like as well as like Nancy. And maybe I'm considering like Nancy as well, totally moving on with her life. But like I'm considering like Jonathan as well as like Jonathan as well as Will's mother, like totally being unable to like move on and then considering like them frantically continuing like the search for Will like all this past year. Yeah, like them their search not ending up with like any results at all. But like I'm considering it would be once like the whole reunion of like Mike and his friends will be after happening after a few years and they will be like eventually running into like the finding 11 at that point. Like at that point, I'm also bring once again like the investigation to like and the attempt to like save Will like once again restarting and basically progress actually happening not only in like Mike and his friends life in like the for like to save Will but also in like uh, Finn's mother as well as like Jonathan as well as Nancy as well as Hopper's life as well. Like the actual progress happening simultaneously from that point on. It's like the eventual possible scenario, other possible scenario that I'm considering. I'm not considering. Okay, so like definitely not the real question right now with like Jonathan as well as Nancy right now seeing this like badly injured deer that seems to have gotten hit by a car. Like I'm considering that car would be precisely the car of Steve's. It's definitely my memory person. So like Steve would be like definitely secretly would be present within like that market for stand from a distance would be like currently right now would be stalking Nancy as well as Jonathan right now. Is definitely my memory impression. So yeah. And maybe also my memory impression for like maybe right now like nearby to where like the injured deer with the maybe like Nancy spotting Steve's car as well. It's definitely also like about video that I'm considering. So like maybe at that point like Nancy maybe having a feeling as of feel like basically Steve most likely having shown up to and would be like stalking. So like I'm considering maybe like Nancy at that point shouting out Steve's name and at that point like Steve showing up from like hiding within like Murphy Forest. Just like also like about scenario that I'm considering. I'm not considering. Okay, so like the claim on the direction right now with like the injured deer being like actively being dragged away. Like I'm just right now with like the scenario that I'm considering right now is for like as like Jonathan and Nancy would be like searching through like the trail of like on like the floor, like on like the ground. I'm considering like them like eventually like that plant like eventually I'm considering like would be like eventually showing most likely what looks like 11 like beside the injured deer. That's like the scenario that I'm considering, and that would be considering like that might have to do with like possibly like since according to my birthday, I'm considering like the humanoid monster, like the actual humanoid initial humanoid monster that basically had basically showed up through like the portal in like the Brenner's laboratory and infiltrated into like Brenner's lab. Like that very first like humanoid monster might be like maybe like the monster that basically even Nancy might have seen from his home as well as also depending on considering. So like there might be that one precise humanoid monster that might be like lurking through and wandering around in like the what would call definitely my memory. So like I'm wondering that humanoid monster possibly definitely being like the like parallel version of like 11 being like due to like Perennial's experience, parallel version of Perennial's experiment going wrong, like basically the parallel version of 11's being turned into like the humanoid monster. And the parallel version of 11 might be like the very first humanoid monster in like the parallel world as well. Which so like definitely my represents that like that humanoid monster would be also having like the power to like basically of like shape shifting and being not shape shifting or like it might be able to like transform back into its like original human form as well as transform back into like its like humanoid like monster like form as well. It's definitely my favorite. So like right now I'm considering like the scenario to be like basically as like um Jonathan and Nancy would be like surfing with their flashlight, like looking for the deer, like after bring them, seeing like 11 like beside the deer, like and then being totally shocked and confused as like what's happening. But like that 11 would be like the parallel version of 11 and not the actual 11, real world 11. So it's like the scenario that I'm considering. That's like the scenario that I'm considering right now. Because like the cleaner principle I'm listening right now with like an answer right now being trapped in like the parallel world. And the different especially because like right now like the tree, like the opening the portal opening in like the tree is like slowly closing by itself. Like definitely my personal impression that like these precise like faceless food creatures would be like the fleas, while humans are like the acrobats and the only human that would be like the flea would be like 11 as well as like all the remaining faceless monster creatures then all would be also he would be like the fleas. It's definitely my personal impression. So like I would bring even though the fleas like all these monsters like faceless creatures might have totally had like the power even though they have would be totally having like the power to travel between like the real world and parallel world, like they might have not even known at all about like the existence of like the real world from while they were all in like the parallel world, they might have not known about like the existence of like the real world, is definitely about the real world. So like this might be the society and sole reason for like them not showing up to like the real world this entire time is definitely one of the realism. But like what might have happened would be like especially in like the past when like Brenner had like opened like the portal for which like definitely Brenner might have sought like 11 might have definitely played like the majority of like the role in like amplifying that energy and basically for like that portal to be opened to be able to be opened within like Brenner's like energy laboratory. But like at that point, some kind of different says like faceless monster creature might have entered into like the real world, and it might have been only not only at that point that these monster creatures might have realized the existence of like the of like another world, like a real world is also definitely my total impression. Other than the parallel world, it's definitely also my total impression. So like this monster might have showed up from like the parallel world into like Brenner's laboratory. Like at that point, self bring 11 might have been totally scared and 11 might have straightly hidden herself as definitely not limit. So like that scientist like who was like who might have definitely stealthily without like Brenner's knowledge, like the whole portal opening like process experiment might have been scheduled to like be performed like the next day, but like he might have not been like that. One scientist might have not been able to like contain his like curiosity, and he might have wanted to like experience it all by himself for the first time. So like maybe due to that reason, he might have in like the middle of the night, like suddenly without like the knowledge of like neither runner or his like other friends team members, like he might have specifically unlocked like the room of like 11 and basically might have made 11 like use of powers to like basically amplify the energy in like runner's lab, and basically that way like he might have opened up like the portal, and like the moment like the portal was open, like I'm also like coincidentally precisely during that time like the faceless monster creature might have been like precisely coincidentally right next to like during that exact time might have been right next to that um area where like in like Brenner's lab where like that scientist might have opened like the portal. So like straight away when like the portal opened up, like the faceless creature might have straight away entered into like the real world, might have been what might have happened. So definitely one with the person. So like after entering into like the real world, I'm also bring like the faceless monster creature might have realized not only the existence of like the real world, a different world, like a real world that's similar to like the parallel world. Yet like I'm also bring like the monster creature might have also realized that basically that it can totally travel between like the real world and parallel world. So, like such it can easily travel between like the real world and parallel world. Might be also one thing like the faceless monster creature might have realized only after entering into like the real world through like an accidental opening of like the portal manner. Which definitely through like the opening of like the portal at that point is only at that point definitely I was able to like I was so like since then, like I'm considering like this faceless monster creature. Like right now, I'm considering like only a single creature might have entered into like the real world of the member of the family. So like that creature might have been staying in like the forest of Mudwood, and I'm considering like might be like since then might have been hunting all the animals from like the Mudwood forest in like the night. Certainly, I was realized, and I'm considering like even right now as like in like the middle of the night, and like Nancy right now has gotten trapped into like the parallel but through like the portal opening on the trees. Like I was doing that might have precisely happened. All this happening might have been precisely happened precisely during 8 o'clock. Is definitely my business. I'm definitely still thinking about the I'm sure that like 8 o'clock, the first time 8 o'clock will be having like a lot of importance. Definitely my business. Connecting to like the portal opening and everything is definitely my business. Even I was wondering like the scientists who might have opened like the portal in like Pranav lab might have opened it precisely during 8 o'clock. It's definitely my also my consideration. So definitely my consideration is that like maybe this so like my consideration is that like in order for this like faceless monster creatures from like the parallel world, in order for this creature to like affect human from like the real world into and bring it into like the parallel world, like a light source would be like absolutely essential and necessary, especially when those represent. The only point where like a light source might not be required for like the travel between like the real world and parallel world would be precisely during exactly 8 o'clock. It's definitely my favorite. Like maybe like some sort of like an importance will be 8 o'clock will be having. So like I'm considering right now, even as like the portal has opened on the tree, like I'm considering the time will be exactly 8 o'clock. It's definitely my favorite. So like and so like the name about the impression is definitely that like Nancy to not be able to like return make it back to like the real world anytime soon at all. It's definitely my favorite. So and definitely thought about it will be eventually once like Will as well as like Barbara would be saved by Hopper and his team, and like also Mike and all of them are bring eventually entering into the parallel world. So like I'm bring eventually once like Will and Barbara would be saved, it will be considering right now it will be only at that point that like Nancy as well would be like finally being saved. Which is like the scenario, even the scenario that I'm looking at. Until that point, I'm delivering like Nancy to like to remain trapped in like that parallel world of like the scenario that I'm delivering. And right now, with like the faceless monster right now, seeing Nancy like I'm in like the parallel world, I'm delivering like right now in those woods. And the same location would be like the parallel version of like the Mercury Forest. So like I'm delivering Nancy totally running away from like the faceless monster, as like the monster will be chasing after Nancy, and I'm delivering Nancy running and basically finding like being able to like hide somewhere is like and hide away from like the monster is like succeeding in Nancy right now succeeding in like hiding from like the monster eventually is like the scenario that I'm looking at. And then I'm about to bring Nancy eventually like totally making her way, and like eventually the scenario that I'm about to bring is like people running into Barbara or like finding Barbara. They also my personal impression that it wouldn't just be Will, but like Barbara as well would be like alive even to the present point, especially my personal impression. So like and I was trying like Nancy in like the battle world before running to Barbara, Nancy would be totally running into Will. Is like the scenario that I was doing. And Nancy at that point is getting that absolute shock. Like the scenario that I was doing. But like Nancy and Will at that point would be like teaming up and would be collectively trying to like find Barbara. But like I was doing their whole attempt to like find Barbara and was doing like Barbara was doing like not being able to be found by like the team of even the team of out of Will and Nancy like in time in like the in time would be only like the distant future of that I'm going to bring like Nancy and Will would be finally able to like find Barbara, like the scenario that I'm going to bring. Like the first person that in like the parallel world that Nancy will be only running into will be precisely Will is like the scenario that I'm going to bring. Also definitely my personal impression right now is also that with like Nancy as well, it takes a real world like Nancy as well getting disappeared and lost to like the parallel world like so since like Nancy as well ending right now ending up being like the next person to like disappear like I'm considering especially because of this reason I'm considering this would be like I'm considering this being like too much for like Mike to handle. It's like the scenario that I'm considering, especially with like on top of like Vince disappearance like 11 as well. I'm also bring like might now being able to like find 11 is definitely scenario that I'm also bring. Might like I'm also bring like on top of that like I'm also bring that this very day I'm also bring definitely since it has already turned night I'm also bring like might totally an extremely disturbed might like totally at like the disappearance of 11 like an extremely disturbed Mike like heading back home. And I'm particularly like the next day like poor Mike like waking up with like the news about like Nancy being like the next person to disappear. So like Mike's sister Nancy disappearing, someone so precious to people who are like extremely precious to Mike like Will and now like 11 as well. And particularly like Mike not being able to like Mike won't be even in like the mindset to actually even search for 11 is definitely my only famous. And once like Mike would be finding out about like Nancy's disappearance, it's definitely one of the famous. So like collectively all these people who are like extremely close and precious to that Mike disappearing and also bring that to totally like destroy that optimism of Mike is like the scenario that I'm also bring that like I'm also bring with like Nancy as well disappearing and also bring that being too much for Mike to like continue his like quest to like find Will that I'm considering like that whole time skip I'm considering right now happening without much delay. Like I'm to be perfectly like the shock of like Nancy's news. Like I'm also like Mike to be totally getting discouraged. Like Mike getting like extremely discouraged from and all of the hopes of Mike like getting crushed at that point. And basically that resulting in like Mike totally lying to himself and basically trying to stray away from his true self and basically trying to and considering it might to be in like kind of like a frozen kind of like a state and totally extremely sad and like disappointed which and extremely sad and disturbed and considering like might like basically the years passing by is like the scenario that I'm focusing in. Like Mike and Dustin as well as Lucas at that point would be totally feeling extremely down and like hopeless at that point that I'm considering like the time skip to probably happen at that point. And I'm considering it will be only after like a few years that I'm thinking of my personal impression right now that it will be only after like a few years that I'm considering that is disturbance and that's an absolute disturbance still remaining within Mike, Lucas, and Justin, and them eventually bringing them together. And basically, from that point on, is when I'm also bring like the search for like for the disappearance of like Will, 11 as well as like Nancy, all of them like continuing and making actual progress like only happening only at that point after a few years. It's like the once like the reunion would be happening between like Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. It's like the scenario that I'm going to bring. I'm not going to remember. I'm sort of feeling on the Indian question right now that basically since I'm personally right now totally fighting without much delay at all, like I'm in terms of preferring like a time skip, I'm preferring like especially during like the years of like while like the time skip will be happening like I'm also preferring like during that time I was preferring like between like Mike, Dustin and Lucas I'm also preferring maybe like them leaving the town of Hawkins is like the scenario that I'm also thinking like so like maybe either I'm definitely leaning more towards the possibility that it will be not likely Lucas sports that I'm also preferring would be changed by Lucas's parents, and maybe like Dustin's parents as well changing like Dustin's school from like the and like that way like them possibly even leaving the town of Hawking is like the scenario that I was doing. Maybe Mike alone, Mike being like the only person to like stay in like the town of Hawkins, which is like also like an eventual possible scenario that I was doing. And then three like having their reunion, like the disturbance still even though maybe like Lucas or Dustin will be leaving the town of Hawkins, like basically like the disturbance to still remain within them and basically within Mike as well, and that disturbance eventually bringing them back to like bringing them all back to like the town of Hawkins again after like a few years, and basically they are like them getting back on track with their whole quest to like save Will save and find Will like 11 Barbara and Nancy and all that like basically is that totally like everything totally resuming after like the precise few years after like Mike Lucas and Dustin will be having their reunions like the into scenario that I'm about to bring in and the story I'm present that is pretty much sort of my Victorian question is that like on top of like basic will like Nancy's disappearance as well I'm about to bring to the chat like for Jonathan as well like the scenarios that I'm about to bring and I'm about to bring like Will's mother will be like Jonathan's mother like will be totally seeing this as like how uh, extremely sad and depressed like Jonathan will be and at that point and shocked Jonathan will be at that point that I was bring like the Jonathan badly uh, so that like at that point I was considering like Vince's mother like taking the decision to like basically that she would be definitely feeling that Jonathan definitely needs that for change of like change as life to basically for him because like at that point I'm also bring Vince's mother probably feeling as of like if she leaves Jonathan like the way he is like basically like it might end up bad for like Jonathan so like I'm also bring Will's mother at that point like totally like somehow struggling her way into like basically somehow making enough money to like basically send Jonathan to NYU. I'm considering definitely at that point like Will's mother thinking of like basically NYU since like the college that Jonathan wanted to like get into since like Jonathan was like 6 years old. So like I was going at that point like Will's mother thinking of that being like the best thing that she could do for Jonathan to pick Jonathan that I was covering like at that point. Like while that science tip would be happening, I was covering Jonathan safely like being sent to like NYU somehow like Will's mother like totally like making Jonathan even though like it might have been such an ultimate goal for Jonathan like still in like the current situation with like Will gone and disappeared and on top of that Nancy will disappear and considering like definitely Jonathan definitely would be even to the present would be like even after Nancy had basically changed so much like still Jonathan deep down into the present would have had that absolute like feelings of affection and love towards like Nancy so like Nancy's disappearance would be that another huge shock for like for Jonathan that I'm considering like Will's mother totally like somehow like even though like Will's mother would be telling Jonathan to like that like NYU would be like the best thing for Jonathan to do right now to go to NYU like still Jonathan would be like totally not wanting at all to like go to like NYU still I'm playing Will's mother like somehow making eventually making like Jonathan agree to it and that way like Jonathan basically being sent off to like the college in NYU. So like precisely when like the once like the time skip would be over, like I'm considering like Jonathan would be like most likely returning back up like studies from NYU. It's like also back to like the town of Hawkins, like the scenario that I'm considering. And I'm considering precisely as like Jonathan would be returned back home, like Jonathan like shockingly seeing that precise the first thing that Jonathan would be seeing at that point while Jonathan would be returning back home and opening the door would be like his mother like still like with all the fairy lights and with like everything like Amazon still her like not doing like the first thing that like the first sight that Jonathan will be seeing after returning back from NYU and like opening this like door to his home that would be his like mother still like frantically like writing down a lot of things and basically still even more great number of fairy lights and like everything within like his home and basically within their home and basically still at that point like Jonathan shockingly realizing that his mother still hasn't given up on Bill that basically still she's like diligently without giving up, just like totally trying to like save and find well, like basically. And on the other like by then like once like Will's mother will be like seeing Jonathan, she will be so happy and like she will be like considering like totally starting to like lose her mind during by then with like her being all by herself with like neither Lonnie nor Jonathan being present in like that home, like her all by herself, like having spent all these years like will be slowly starting to like lose some sanity is like the scenario that I was living and seeing Jonathan at that point like her like totally like excitedly telling Jonathan about like all of her the stories and everything, but like I'm considering by then I'm considering like it would be like mostly her she might have even by then might have started to like reach a state of mind where she might have started like hallucinate as well. It's also like a possible scenario that I'm considering. So like her saying at that point what she would be excitedly telling Jonathan would be her hallucinations as well. Is like also like an eventual scenario that I'm observing. And for Jonathan seeing his mother like that, like Jonathan tearing up and like Jonathan hugging his like mother, and basically Jonathan at that point determined to definitely to solve this and basically to solve this and ensure that to not give up, like exactly like his mother wasn't willing to like give up on the like for him as well, deciding to like not give up at all until he finds and saves Will. And Jonathan as well still believing that Will would definitely still be alive, and Johnson straight away going up and totally going up to where Hopper would be, and Hopper as well even then would be totally alive, and like Hopper as well would be like totally, and I was thinking by then like I'm considering Hopper would have totally gotten dismissed from his like job at like the station. It's like the scenario that I'm considering. By in between that whole time period, I'm considering like Bernard and his team might have totally might have framed like Hopper into like as like a crazy person, and that way like Hopper like Brenner using his influence and power to like basically get Hopper dismissed from his like job as the chief sort of reflect the scenario that I'm considering. Yet like I'm considering while Jonathan will be like after the time skip will be like meeting Hopper like at that point like even Hopper as well kind of like in a similar manner to like his mother, like yet like Hopper would be like not going crazy, but like Hopper would be like carefully like still would be carefully like precisely even Hopper like form as well would be like totally filled with like also the like like writings and everything that Hopper or all of the findings that Hopper would have made within that whole years of time period between like the time skip is like the initial scenario that I'm observing, and them all collectively like basically continuing like search to like find Will as well as like Barbara as well as like Nancy after like the time skip. It's like scenario that I'm sequential scenario that I'm putting and my memory impression. Okay, so like also the memory impression right now as for like during like the time skip since I'm considering like Jonathan to like be getting into like the NYU college, like I'm considering like as to like how exactly that might happen, like how exactly that would be possible for like Jonathan. I'm considering it to be precisely because of Hopper, but definitely I'm considering that simply because of like the recent phone call that Hopper had made to his ex-wife, like through that phone call that Hopper has realized that basically Hopper had only felt that basically like his wife, ex-wife has like long forgot about like Sarah, and basically that will be along the lines Hopper has felt, and basically also that basically even if Hopper dies tomorrow, like it wouldn't even matter to his ex-wife at all, or even remotely affect her at all. So Hopper right now would be only feeling that absolute lonely feeling right now in his life, that he has absolutely no one to uh, to help, or like he has absolutely no one in his life. So like I'm assuming that would be that absolute feeling of like pain that like I'm assuming right now Hopper would be going through as well. Especially when listening to like I'm assuming like the very next day, like, right now with like Nancy being trapped in like the battle world, like I'm assuming, like the very next day for I'm assuming like Hopper like literally only like noticing how extremely depressed and sad Jonathan would be after like the shock of like Nancy's disappearance. So like I'm assuming like Hopper totally like being able to tell that basically like Johnson was like madly in love with like Nancy. So like at that point like I was saying like Hopper as well might be the only feeling as if like basically like Hopper as well then would be like interacting with like like Jonathan's mother, and I was like Hopper at that point, genuinely feeling as if like things definitely won't be like definitely that like Jonathan definitely needs like a change in his life, and basically so definitely, and with like Hopper having feeling as if like he has like said person have absolutely no one in his life at all. Like at that point, I was wondering like Hopper totally looking at like Jonathan as his like own son, and I'm also bring like a Hopper at that point, like totally like helping Jonathan out with like deciding to like help Jonathan out with his like admission to like NYU, as well as like Hopper like even supporting like Jonathan financially to like basically that way kid just like while Jonathan would be like entering into that way, like Jonathan's like entry into like just like uh, the college of NYU being popular through Hopper. It's like the eventual scenario that I'm going to roll for again. Very much. And also definitely my first very impression that I'm still thinking on this side, like this whole search for like when that began for like Hopper, like Ambassador, like that whole journey of like the search for Will Ambassador, like eventually ending up with like Hopper not only finding Will, but like also eventually in like towards the very end, like finding his family, finding a true family as well for him as well. It's like the scenario that I'm also and definitely towards the very end, I'm also like Hopper. Still thinking of my personal impression that like Hopper will be like eventually like staying at the same home and living with like Will as well as Jonathan as well as like as well as like as well as Will's mother with like the eventual scenario that I'm about to bring, and Jonathan will be totally so extremely glad and happy to like have Hopper as like a father. It's like the scenario, not just like Jonathan, but like Will as well would be totally happy to have to have Hopper as a father, and definitely like like Will's mother as well would be totally happy to have a husband at that point, like Hopper, like the scenario, which I'll find a happy ending kind of like a scenario that I'm also thinking, and my personal impression that I'm sitting on.